She never imagined saving a stranger would bring her husband back from the dead. The night smelled of rain and burning metal, the kind that carries memories of things you've lost and can't forget. Emma gripped the steering wheel as lightning ripped open the sky, the road ahead swallowed in darkness. Then, out of nowhere, a car spun across the highway, flipping like a toy before slamming into the guardrail. She didn't hesitate. She ran. The flames painted her face with terror and resolve as she dragged the unconscious driver out. But when her trembling hands searched his pockets for ID, her heart stopped cold. A silver bracelet, the same one her late husband wore the night he died, gleamed in her palm. Was this a nightmare? Or had fate just opened a door she wasn't ready to walk through? The sirens wailed in the distance, but all Emma could hear was her own heartbeat, pounding like a warning. She sat in the back of the ambulance, drenched and trembling, watching paramedics stabilize the man she'd saved. His face was unfamiliar, yet something about the curve of his jaw and the faint scar near his temple tugged at buried memories. She couldn't let go of the bracelet resting in her palm. Every time the light hit it, her chest tightened. Could it really be his, or had grief finally blurred the line between what was real and what she needed to believe? Hours later, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and unanswered questions. Emma sat in the waiting area, staring at the sterile floor tiles that mirrored her exhaustion. Every sound, a monitor beep, a nurse's footsteps, felt magnified in the silence. When the doctor approached and said the man had no identification, her stomach sank. It didn't make sense. Who was he? And why did he have her husband's bracelet? The thought whispered through her mind like a storm she couldn't outrun. Maybe this wasn't a coincidence at all. The next morning, sunlight crept into her small kitchen, touching the photo of her husband and daughter on the fridge. Lily's laughter from the living room felt like a lifeline, pulling her back from the chaos. Emma wanted to believe the night before had been a dream, but the bracelet on the counter glimmered like proof that fate wasn't done with her yet. She touched it gently, remembering the last night she saw Mark alive. His promise that he'd always find his way back to them. That evening, unable to silence the pull in her chest, Emma drove back to the hospital. The man she saved was still unconscious, his heartbeat steady, but slow. She stood by his bedside, her reflection merging with his in the glass. In his stillness, she saw both a stranger and a message, one that began the night her world fell apart. Her fingers brushed the bracelet once more. If life was giving her a second chance to understand, she wasn't sure she was ready to hear the answer. The hospital smelled like rain again when Emma returned the next day, as if the world itself remembered. She told herself she was just checking in, making sure he survived. But when she saw him awake, sitting up and staring at the window like he'd seen another life, something inside her shifted. He didn't remember his name, his home, or even how he'd crashed. Yet when their eyes met, a flicker of recognition passed between them, quick and inexplicable. Then he whispered a question that made her knees weaken. "Do you know someone named Mark?" Emma froze. It wasn't possible. He couldn't know that name. Her voice trembled as she asked where he'd heard it, but he just shook his head, eyes wide and scared. He said the name came to him in a dream, a voice calling through water, whispering that she would find him. The words sank into her like stones. Grief had taught her to fear coincidences, but this felt like something else, like a message carried through time, waiting for her to listen. Later that night, Emma sat in her car in the hospital parking lot, rain tapping against the windshield like impatient fingers. She replayed his voice in her head, the way he'd said, "Mark," soft but certain. Maybe it was all in her mind, just grief twisting the world to keep her from letting go. But when she glanced at the passenger seat, the bracelet glowed faintly in the dim dashboard light, as if reminding her it was real. Sometimes, she thought, ghosts don't come back to haunt us. They come back to guide us. The next morning, she brought Lily to school before heading back to the hospital. Her daughter's laughter echoed in her mind, a fragile reminder of normalcy. But the moment she walked through the sterile hallway, the world shifted again. The nurse said Daniel had been restless in his sleep, repeating a single phrase over and over. "He promised me. He promised me." The words chilled her blood. Emma didn't know who he was talking about, but deep down she feared she already did. That night, Emma dreamed of the crash. But this time, she wasn't the one running toward the fire. She saw Daniel standing there, calling her name through smoke, his eyes full of sorrow she didn't understand. When she woke, the bracelet was gone from her bedside table. Panic rose in her throat as she searched the room, but something inside her whispered that it hadn't been taken. It had gone where it needed to be, with him. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the missing bracelet. She retraced every step, every word Daniel had said, searching for logic in something that felt beyond reason. When she entered his hospital room, the answer stared back at her. The bracelet was in his hand. He was asleep, murmuring something under his breath, the same words he'd said in her dream. "He promised me." It wasn't just coincidence anymore. It was connection, deep, invisible, and terrifying. Determined to find answers, Emma visited the police station that had handled her husband's accident. The officer on duty flipped through dusty files and frowned. The report mentioned an unidentified witness, a man who had called for help from a nearby construction site the night Mark died but vanished before giving a statement. Emma's pulse quickened as she read the name on the form's edge, written in faint pencil. T. Cross. The world tilted beneath her feet. She drove to the old construction site mentioned in the file. A ghostly shell of steel and silence. Rain pooled in cracked concrete, and rusted beams creaked in the wind. Her footsteps echoed, as if the past itself were listening. Near the edge of the site, she found something buried under a pile of gravel, a charred piece of fabric with the same pattern as her husband's shirt. Her throat tightened. The site where her husband had died was also where Daniel had once been. Back at the hospital, Daniel stirred as she entered. His eyes, still clouded with confusion, followed her with silent apology. When she showed him the photo of the site, his face went pale. "I've been there," he whispered. He was there too. His hand trembled as he pressed his palm against his forehead, fragments of memory flashing like lightning. He said he had to finish something before it was too late. Emma's heart clenched. For the first time, she wasn't sure whether she was speaking to a man or a messenger. That night, as rain whispered against her window, Emma listened to an old voicemail she hadn't dared play since her husband's death. His voice was soft, hurried. "If anything happens to me, promise me you'll trust what comes next." She sat frozen, tears falling silently. The words connected like threads in her mind. The bracelet, the crash, the name D. Cross. It wasn't random. It was a trail her husband had left behind, and it had finally led her to the man who carried his unfinished promise. The hospital corridors felt heavier now, like every echo carried a secret waiting to be spoken. When Emma entered Daniel's room, he was sitting up, staring blankly at the bracelet in his hand. He said he remembered flashes. A man's voice, a promise, a flash of fire. His words trembled as he spoke. "He said I had to find you." Emma's breath caught. The world narrowed around those 6 words. She'd spent years begging for a sign from her husband, and now it had come. Through a man who shouldn't have known his name. Emma leaned closer, voice barely a whisper. What did he say? Daniel closed his eyes, struggling to piece the fragments together. He said, "You'd think it was over, but it wasn't," he said to tell you. "Love doesn't die. It just changes shape." A silence fell so deep it hurt. Those were the exact words Mark had told her on their anniversary, days before his death. Her chest tightened with disbelief. How could this stranger carry her husband's last words? She asked if he remembered who he was before the crash. Daniel shook his head, tears brimming. Only pieces. I remember being in pain. I remember someone reaching for me. A man with kind eyes. He said he was sorry for not saving me sooner. Emma stared at him. Realization dawning slow and cold. The night of Mark's death, there had been another accident nearby. Another car that had gone off the road. Her husband had died trying to save someone else. That evening Emma met with the officer again. He retrieved a box from storage, one labeled with her husband's case number. Inside were the wreck's remains, a crushed watch, a burnt photograph, and a folded note she had never seen before. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Scrawled in her husband's handwriting were the words, "If this reaches her, tell her he's worth saving. His name is Daniel." The note fell from her hands. The truth hit like lightning. Her husband had died saving the man she just brought back to life. When she returned to the hospital, she couldn't speak. Daniel looked up, sensing the storm behind her eyes. She handed him the note, her voice breaking. "He saved you." Daniel stared at the paper, lips trembling. "Then I owe him my life." Emma shook her head gently. "You already gave it back." For the first time, neither of them felt like strangers. The silence between them wasn't emptiness anymore. It was connection, sacred and unexplainable. The truth had a weight Emma wasn't ready to carry. She sat in the hospital chapel, the note clutched in her hand, replaying her husband's voice in her mind. Daniel was alive because of Mark. Every moment she'd spent grieving had been mirrored by his survival. It wasn't just fate that tied them. It was sacrifice. She whispered into the empty room. "Why him? Why you?" The silence that followed felt almost like an answer. Because saving him was how Mark found a way to live on. When she returned to Daniel's room, he was staring at his reflection in the window. A haunted look in his eyes. "I remember," he said quietly. "There was an explosion. He pushed me out of the car before it went up." His voice cracked. "I should have died." Emma's throat closed as she stepped closer. "He didn't want you to die," she said, her words trembling. "He wanted you, for both of you." In that moment, the pain between them shifted into something softer, understanding. They sat in silence as rain streaked the window. Daniel reached for the bracelet, turning it slowly in his fingers. "I think he gave it to me before the fire." His voice broke on the last word. He said, "If she ever finds you, tell her she's stronger than she knows." Emma pressed her palm to her lips, tears slipping through her fingers. Her husband hadn't just saved Daniel's life. He had left behind the one man who could carry his final message. Later, Daniel handed her a small envelope that the nurses had found in his jacket pocket, sealed but scorched at the edges. Inside was a folded letter, written in her husband's handwriting, the one she'd thought was lost in the crash. It read, "If this reaches you, it means I kept my promise. I couldn't save myself, but I saved him. He'll carry my heart until you're ready to let go." Emma pressed the letter to her chest, the tears coming quietly now, the kind that cleanse rather than destroy. By evening, the rain had stopped. Emma stood by the window, the city spread beneath her like a living memory. She looked at Daniel, asleep at last, peace softening the lines of his face. She whispered to the night, "You kept your word, Mark." Her reflection merged with the skyline as she slipped the bracelet onto her wrist one final time. It no longer felt like loss. It felt like connection. A circle finally closed. Days passed like slow rain, gentle and endless. Emma began visiting Daniel less out of duty and more out of something unspoken. A pull that felt like peace. She still couldn't say she forgave fate, but she had stopped fighting it. One afternoon, as she helped him take his first steps down the hospital corridor, she realized that grief had become her shadow. Always there, but no longer leading her. She smiled softly, not because the pain was gone, but because she could finally breathe beside it. One morning, Emma brought Lily to meet Daniel. Her daughter's laughter filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Daniel smiled faintly, eyes wet as he listened. He said Lily reminded him of hope, the kind he thought he'd never feel again. Watching them together, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Maybe forgiveness wasn't an act, but a moment like this, when the heart recognizes kindness in a place where pain once lived. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Emma sat alone on the porch. The sky was a dark ocean of stars, quiet and vast. She held the silver bracelet between her fingers, tracing its curve like a prayer. "I forgive you," she whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the world itself, to fate, to the ache inside her chest, and maybe to herself most of all. In that still moment, she felt something shift, the kind of peace that doesn't erase the past, but lets it rest. The next day, Daniel was discharged. Emma drove him home, the silence between them calm and easy. They passed the place where his car had crashed, where it all began. Without speaking, he asked her to stop. He stepped out, stood by the guardrail, and whispered something she couldn't hear. Then he turned back to her, eyes steady, and smiled. In that smile, she saw gratitude, not just for being saved, but for being forgiven. That evening, Emma visited Mark's grave. The sun dipped low, painting the world in amber and quiet grace. She placed the bracelet on the grass, her fingertips lingering for a moment. "You kept your promise," she whispered, tears glinting in the fading light. "And I'll keep living for all of us." The wind rustled through the trees as if answering her, soft and forgiving. For the first time since he'd gone, she didn't walk away empty. Weeks passed, and life began to sound like life again. The sirens, the laughter, the ordinary hum of mornings, all the things Emma once feared she'd never feel at peace with. Daniel started walking without a cane, and Lily started drawing again, her pictures full of suns instead of storms. Emma watched it all with quiet wonder. Healing, she realized, doesn't come like a flood. It comes in tiny ripples, the sound of a kettle, the weight of a child's hug, the simple act of breathing without breaking. One morning, Emma opened a small box she hadn't touched since Mark's funeral. Inside were their wedding rings, still shining beneath layers of dust. She smiled softly, no longer broken by the sight. Instead, she slipped one ring onto a chain and placed it around her neck, not as a memory of what she'd lost, but as a symbol of what remained. Love, she thought, was never meant to be owned. It was meant to be carried quietly and endlessly. That afternoon, Daniel stopped by her porch with 2 cups of coffee. They sat in silence, watching the sky turn the color of forgiveness, that in-between shade where day meets night. "I still feel him," Daniel said softly. Emma nodded. "So do I." And in that quiet acknowledgement, there was no need for more words. Some connections don't end. They just find new forms, new hearts to live inside. Later that week, Emma and Lily visited the sea. The waves whispered against the shore, like gentle reminders of everything that comes and goes, but never truly disappears. Lily ran along the sand, her laughter echoing over the water, and Emma closed her eyes to the wind. She thought of Mark, not as a memory that hurt, but as a presence that soothed. Every wave that touched her feet felt like a promise renewed. Love doesn't leave. It simply changes its voice. That night, back home, Emma stood by the window where it had all begun. The rain had returned, gentle, forgiving, almost kind. She looked out and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the storm, not to the sky, but to everything that had broken her, and then rebuilt her. On her wrist, a faint tan line marked where the bracelet once was, a quiet reminder of a love that refused to die. She smiled through her tears, realizing the truth she'd waited years to hear. She hadn't just saved a man that night, she'd saved herself.